I am joined by Democratic strategist and the founder of Third Degree Strategies. That's a progressive communication firm, Max Burns.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, and welcome back. I know you're somewhat of a regular here, in part because you have so much incredible insight. And now we're going to talk about something that we definitely need your insight with, which is about essentially the GOP's efforts to control abortion rights and predominantly women's bodies. What's going on?
So the Republican Party on the state level is engaged in a really successful war on choice. And by that, I don't just mean a woman's right to choose abortion anymore. Now it's a woman's right to move freely between states. It's a family's right to decide what medical treatment is right for their kid. And these are laws that are all based on this Texas abortion bill that is before the Supreme Court now and likely may result in the end of Roe versus Wade as we know it.
That's really scary. Roe versus Wade has been an institution in a lot of lives across America for decades. And so the thought that it could be upended is very, very scary. And I know there are several challenges going on right now to Roe v. Wade that are directly in play. But I also know that Missouri Republicans just engaged in some antics. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, what's happening in Missouri is really unprecedented. This is a law that's based on Texas that essentially deputizes your neighbors to tell the state if a woman is going across state lines to get an abortion. And if they are caught, that woman could end up in court. This essentially allows people to bounty hunt women who are trying to exercise their rights. And more than that, it essentially makes abortion illegal nationwide for anyone who lives in Missouri, which is far from the small government conservative language we've heard from Republicans before.
But I'm sure this is, as you mentioned, it's something that parrots Texas's law. So I'm guessing it's operating more on the individual bounty hunter angle, and thus you can say it's not a state government actor who's limiting your rights. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly how they're getting around this. Very similar thing in Idaho. A bill just passed their state house. They would make it a crime for a parent to take their child across state lines to receive gender affirming therapy. And these are all very new attacks on the freedom of privacy and the freedom of movement that don't just attack Roe versus Wade, but Griswold versus Connecticut, the law that grants us a right to privacy in general, and on which gay rights, abortion rights, trans rights all depend. If Republicans can take that out, we're in a really dangerous place.
And I'd like to think there are a lot of Republicans out there who they don't care about gay rights. They really don't care about women's rights. They prefer, whatever rights they have be, whatever benefits white, cis, male, hetero dudes, and it's cool. But I guess if you could give potential, maybe potential thoughts or analogy on how this could end up affecting that dominant class of white, cis, male, heterosexuals, I guess, what would you say to them in terms of having Griswold be turned over or reversed in some way? How could this affect their broader privacy rights?
Well, this really hits home for them. All of the drugs that wealthy white people have been doing for years in the privacy of their homes, that expectation of privacy goes away. If you look at the third of Republicans, a full 33% of Republicans who support legal abortion in at least some cases. This goes farther than they even wanted. The half of Republicans who believe that it should be a parent's choice to get the gender care for their kid that they think is best. All these voters are gonna find that their Republican Party has gone so authoritarian, it is controlling where you can drive, what you can talk about, that puts you in court for doing something the state says is wrong, like driving to get an abortion. That's too much for most voters, and Republicans may find that they've really overstepped here.
Yeah, it sounds like we're entering this kind of dystopian universe in some form or fashion. It's just the question of whether the Supreme Court will allow it and condone it. Is that where we are?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this depends in large part on what the Supreme Court does with this Texas decision now. We're looking at a decision right in the heat of midterm campaign season that says that women don't have a fundamental right that they've had for many of women's lifetimes now. That's gonna drive a huge political realignment. And if these laws start getting upheld, that the state can ask you where you're driving to and stop you if you're going to a place that they don't like, that is a legal place for you to go. that raises real questions about federalism. I mean, that becomes states acting like federal governments in themselves and telling their own residents that they can't freely travel. That hits at the core of what this country is about.
Yeah, it definitely would seem to impact interstate commerce. And maybe that's something that the court can get behind, essentially having some effect on capitalism, given that cash seems to be king here in the United States, but also it almost seems that white male supremacy is even more valuable. And so for those out there who are looking to make change, who do not want to see these things go forward, but also don't want to just sit idly by and hope others do something about it, what would you recommend?
So right now, the time for state action is now. This is happening in state legislatures across the country, not just the ruby red states. These are states that are sometimes considered more moderate, that have Republican legislatures like Pennsylvania pushing really repressive legislation. And the answer now is to vote, to organize and vote. Because unfortunately, there's a very limited list of things Congress or the White House can do. The power is with people here to protect their own rights.
Yes, that is definitely, the power is with the people. And especially with these midterm elections coming up, it seems that there is some potential possibility there to make a meaningful shift. Is that right?
There is, and there are several things that Joe Biden could do to really shake this up. One idea that was floated recently was for the president to lease out federal buildings to abortion providers in states where abortion is not available, essentially getting around restrictive state laws by using federal property to enforce abortion rights. It'd be equivalent to sending the National Guard in to integrate schools. We're acting where states will not. But I question if the president has the political courage to do something like that and to really stand up for abortion rights and privacy rights in such a clear way.
Yeah, I definitely think that that would take some gumption, and I don't necessarily know if Biden has it, but also too, Biden does seem to have that, well, I guess you'd say that opportunity to some extent hide right now behind this battle going on with Russia and Ukraine, and to make sure that is leading headlines and ignore a bit of what is going on in terms of, these privacy rights being tailored back. Would you say that that's about accurate?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think there's a reason Joe Biden didn't say the word abortion once in the State of the Union. I think Democrats have bought this Republican messaging that even talking about abortion is political suicide, when in fact a majority of the country supports the Democratic position on abortion. And the best thing that can happen to Republicans is that things like Missouri happen and we're afraid to talk about them. And then they happen in other states. And pretty soon we're facing a whole country where Democrats are on the defense to protect a fundamental right. And that's a place we can avoid, but we have to act and we have to be courageous.
Absolutely. And so at the state level, when it comes to things like being able to provide your child with gender affirming care or being able to access abortion, couldn't states make it a part of their constitution?
Yeah, and some states have. New York put Roe versus Wade into their state constitutions as well. That's a huge effort that is certainly going to be pushed back on in red states. But like I say, with a third of Republicans who support some abortion rights, Republicans would be shocked to find that a lot of red states would put abortion into their constitutions if there was an opportunity to let people speak freely. In that case, it's red state legislatures and their Republican donors who have largely stopped that progress. And the only way around that is to vote.
Yes, it definitely would seem to be, hopefully, the voting aspect of it, but also seeing essentially GOP find ways to curb voting rights and access to it. It almost seems that it would be somewhat futile to even try to push back at this point. Well, at least I'd like to think so, but I know it'd be worthwhile. Do you see any changes in terms of voter right access?
Unfortunately, not in the near term. I think Joe Manchin and the filibuster have made pretty clear, as with their vote to protect abortion and put abortion rights into law, that with the filibuster in place, we're going to find that filibuster outlives a lot of our fundamental rights. And I'm not sure Americans are going to like the country we have if we continue down that course.
Yes, and it seems like a lot of us are going to suffer in the meantime, especially given all the young faces that are on the US Supreme Court with very limited mindsets, that they're going to be around for quite some time. But again, in terms of things that people can do on the ground today, they can look forward to doing it next month. They should be focusing on doing it just sometime in the future to make that meaningful change. What would you tell them?
I would say that this is the fight. There is no stepping back from this. The fundamental right to privacy and voting rights together are the bedrock of the modern society we live in. It's hard to imagine a country without voting rights, without a fundamental right to privacy, without gay rights. But that is a real possibility. And the last thing we need is to be demoralized. I say push Republicans, push Democrats equally so, to talk about these issues and to make clear that people are angry, because we're simply not hearing that level of anger from elected representatives, and that is infuriating.
No, and I definitely think a lot of people have that COVID exhaustion, as well as just trying to make it through every day, especially with prices rising and housing crisis and everything going on, that they are not necessarily giving this the attention it deserves because they feel like it doesn't directly impact them. And so I really appreciate you coming on to share your insight. And it's a very scary time, but as you said, this is the fight. And so in terms of people who want to follow you, get more information, where can they find you?
You can follow me on Twitter at @Max Burns. Send your hate mail there. And also you can read me at NBC News and on the Daily Beast.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. That's Max Burns, Democratic strategist and the founder of Third Degree Strategies. Thanks for joining us, Max.